and people are in and out of the office. So we appreciate everybody taking their time to come and meet with us today and socialize and hopefully learn a little bit. Also, thanks for coming on an odd day for us. We normally do these on Thursday, but today is Wednesday. So thanks for accommodating the one-time change in day. This is probably the only time we're going to do it on a Wednesday. Next meeting in September, we'll be back to our normal Thursday schedule. But because we have a small but mighty group, I think we'll do introductions with everyone. And apologies, we're in a little bit of a different room today. So those of you online, I won't be able to turn the camera around for you to see who's in the audience, but we'll make do with what we have. So my name is Robin Shook from Children's Mercy Hospital, and I'm the director of the Kansas City Healthy Lifestyles Collaborative. We'll start with my team right here.
Hey everyone, I'm Kelly Clay. I also work at the Children's Mercy at the Healthy Lifestyles Collaborative. I support the senior sector and the early childhood sector.
I'm Natalie Updike. I support our sports sector, infrastructure, and business and sectors.
And maybe we'll do Katie too, just knock all of us out of the way.
Hi, Katie Amy. These lovely people, and I support our media communications, telecom, and recreation, and health.
Great. Now we'll go to our wonderful community partners, starting with the wonderful Bill Brandmeier.
Yes, I'm Bill Brandmeier. I'm the sports sector lead. Pleasure working with Robin and his team for the last 4 years. I was just yesterday, and I'm excited to be here. Excited to be part of this. It's one of my favorite things to do is to be part of the Healthy Lifestyles Collaborative's Kansas City Physical Activity Plan. I run a youth sports foundation that is working really hard to try to solve some of the problems that keep kids out of sports, and then help to use sports to help kids become better people.
Great. And I will note we will do kind of organizational updates after our main presentation today. So I know Bill's got a lot of announcements, but for now we'll just do introduction. So next.
All right, so I'm Rebecca and this is Krupa. We are from Clark County Health Department, Health Education Division. We are new to these groups. We've been on a couple. We've been on early childhood because we have a grant with our early childhood development team. We've also been on Parks and Recs, infrastructure. We've dabbled in sports, just to try to find where we can help best, because to be honest with you, our health department has kind of, we're focused on mental health, which is just amazing. We need to dive back into physical health and chronic disease prevention. So we're trying to kind of figure out how we can best do that up in the Northland, because it seems like a lot of the programs are targeted towards down here, which is awesome, but not a lot happening in Platte County, and we're trying to change that. Also, I have a 1-year-old, so I'm very excited about the pediatrics aspect of this presentation. She just learned to walk, so we're about to see what I'm doing wrong. Okay.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Bierman. I'm with Aetna Medicaid. We're looking to bid on the next Mo Health Net contract in Missouri, and hoping that we could collaborate and work together on making this even bigger and better as we move along.
I'm Tammy, and I work with Bill and Jim.
Pete Piscatello, I'm co-lead with Bill on the sports sector, and also work for a national nonprofit called Play Like a Champion. We do coach training, parent and student athlete training for youth and high school sports.
Hi, I'm Brooke Jansen. I work for School and for Health at Kansas City University, and my job is champs coordinator, so we do healthy lifestyle coaching using our Oscar Catholic medical students, and then we also go into schools and do something called
Good morning, everybody. Ed Kramer, I'm a family physician trying to get retired, and I've accomplished that except for teaching. And I did the teaching at KC School of Medicine and PA program. I also live in Lee Summit and serve on the Lee Summit Wellness Commission, and I've been part of this for quite a while.
Good morning, I'm Wayman King. I'm Senior Director of Athletics and Healthy Lifestyles for the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Kansas City.
Good morning, I'm Katrina Mentor. I'm with the Family Conservancy, and we're a nonprofit social service agency, and I'm the manager of community programs here.
My name is Andrew Donaldson. I work at Children's Mercy. I'm a pediatrician there, and then also work in sports medicine too.
Great, and that's a good lead-in. In just a couple minutes, he will be presenting our main presentation today. So, but before we get there, Katie has created some wonderful. Oh, yes, go ahead. Do you want to call on people?
Sarah Hample.
Maybe eating their own breakfast.
She's my little Catherine Minor.
Yes.
Hello, Catherine.
Hi.
Would you like?
To introduce myself? Oh, sure.
Yes,
Sure.
please.
Sorry about that. Yes, I'm Dr. Miner. I have been attending and helping. Hopefully, I'm helping. Katie can say whether I'm helping or not. The curriculum group from the KCPA plan. I'm ER trained, but I'm actually teaching lifestyle medicine and culinary medicine at UMKC for the School of Medicine, and here shortly the PA program, and then I teach culinary medicine and cooking classes in the community. And just am very interested in helping out to improve the lives of Kansas Cityans.
Great, excellent.
And last is Missy Barnett. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi there. I think, did you guys say my name?
Yeah, hi Sarah. Yeah,
Hi.
go ahead. You can introduce yourself.
Sorry, I can't quite hear everybody, but I'm sorry that I can't be there in person. I'm in clinic today, but just wanted to say hi to everybody. I'm Sarah Hample, pediatrician and weight management, and Dr. Miner, I have heard about you because Sarah Cox, the PA, one of the PA leadership folks, mentioned on our MOCAN call that you were going to be doing a lesson or two for the PA students, and how she's really trying to develop the lifestyle medicine curriculum. So we're really glad to have you join, and good to hear everybody as they introduce themselves.
Yeah, thanks, and apologies. We're in a different room today, and the AV, the sound is and speakers
No worries.
are not quite as great as in some of the other rooms. But. Missy, I guess if you're available and you want to introduce yourself. Okay. If not, so we'll start out with a Mentimeter poll that Katie has made for us. So you can either go to menti.com and enter in the code that you see on the screen, or you can just use your smartphone to scan the QR code and it will take you directly to the Mentimeter poll. I'll leave this up for just a second before I switch over. Okay.
Missy said her mic's not working.
Okay.
But she works for Corporate Fitness Works and is our business and industry sector co-lead.
Okay. Our first question today is, this is Great Outdoors Month. What's your favorite way to get out and enjoy nature? You can just type in whatever you feel. No clear winner, but looks like hiking, biking, swimming, and gardening are the top ones. I know we've got a pool date set up for this weekend. Katie wants to know where she can go hiking at.
Yeah, asking for a friend.
Yeah.
Swamp Park's incredible.
They're so cute. I was just curious.
Yeah,
I'm looking for new trails all the time.
Lane Creek is awesome. Right? Lane Creek, if you're north. Yeah. Yeah, and it's all dog friendly and making it.
Yes.
You know, I heard of a hike recently that I thought was pretty cool. They hiked Troost, from the beginning of Troost to 95th and Troost. It's
Oh, my.
10 miles.
Wow.
It was an urban hike, but
Yeah.
I saw something recently, but it was about like urban hiking and they were starting over.
Yeah.
Curious and then.
and Troost is kind of that division line in Kansas City.
Yeah.
You know, the segregation and stuff. And so it was all the businesses that have developed along Troost and all the dilapidated, all the, you know, bad places. Go with the group and go maybe, you know, not by yourself.
Yeah. You can do sidewalk assessments along the way and share with the city, because I know they're planning on doing major changes
Yeah.
to Troost to improve walkability and traffic. So, yeah. Okay, next question. Katie wants to know whether you'd rather go on a sunrise hike or a sunset paddle.
Hiking kind
I will not go on Menti, but
I'm gonna go with the hike.
That one is terrible.
Although I think that photos. So I think it could be hot and not just on a paddle.
And if you were trying to do yoga on a paddleboard, as hard as you think it is, it's harder. You gotta be prepared to swim, because you're gonna just do it.
I have no balance. So
Oh, yeah.
absolutely not.
Go with friends, it's really easy. You don't actually do yoga, but it's entertaining.
And wear a life jacket.
Right. Maybe.
All right, last question is, what's your favorite outdoor game from childhood? I'll say, keeping with the the pool theme, my favorite game by far was, we called it pit tag. You know, you go to the deepest part of the pool and you'd play basically, you know, tag in there. We played that for hours and hours and hours in my youth. Kiddie pool, kickball, wiffle ball, foursquare, hopscotch. Hopscotch is big in our family right now. All right. Well, this is a good segue to our main presentation today, talking about children's games. Our main speaker today is, lots of switching here. Our main presentation today is from Dr. Andrew Donaldson. Dr. Donaldson is a pediatric fellow. Are you a fellow or?
5 weeks, yeah.
Great. And I looked at your bio and then forgot to print it off. So you've been at Children's Mercy for about 6 years or so. Come on up.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I graduated from medical school in 2021, been at Children's ever since, did my general pediatrics residency there, and then sports medicine fellowship this year.
Yeah, excellent. And he's going to talk today about pediatric athlete development. Will you get into your talk why you're interested in this? Or okay, yeah. Excellent. Well, with that, I will get out of the way and let Dr. Donaldson. Oh.
This is what we're seeing online.
Let me. Okay. Yeah, I mean, he didn't. Okay. Maybe could you go grab him again and you can go ahead and get started, and then we'll have to do a quick adjustment once we get the screen sharing done.
Sure, yeah. How much space to wander do I have?
You can wander as much as you want, I would say.
Okay.
Just keep in mind, there are people online, so just try to stay somewhat close to the mic.
I am a little bit of a wanderer when I talk, so that's always an important disclaimer. If I start wandering away and leave the room, that might be why. But I am super excited to be able to be here with you all today and talk about this topic. Like Robin was mentioning, I will start here just in case we have to do a little bit of a break off and change the screens. I first became interested in this topic during my pediatric training, right? I found myself talking with families a lot about ways to get their kids up and moving. Of course, you know, during that, I was also talking to them a lot about like healthy dietary choices and things like that, right? And portion size. I feel like portion size was one of the biggest things I talked about. Your 1-year-old does not need a whole apple every day. That's a lot for a 1-year-old. And so as I was having these conversations, though, I really realized I didn't have a great framework to understand the process by which we can get kids moving, right? I had like my little dot phrase. For those of you who maybe work in healthcare, you can like write a paragraph and then abbreviate it in electronic medical records as dot activity, and it'll pull up everything that you ever have said about that, which is great, but that is just a couple of things, and it doesn't really understand the whole developmental process by which we get kids active and moving. Pause here for a moment.
How much of an apple should your 1-year-old eat? Asking for a friend.
So what I normally say is the portion size for a kid is the size of their palm.
Okay.
And so, you know, that is like a strawberry, not 10 strawberries, right? Now, do I have a 10-month-old who can smash blueberries like nobody's business? Yes. But trying to be mindful of that as well. Also, he does not like gaining weight, and so I'm very okay with him, you know, having more.
Okay.
Yeah. So as part of this, I think that it's important to discuss what exactly is physical literacy. When I kind of got into this topic, I don't think it was something I could define particularly well. It was something I probably could explain around and dance around just a little bit, but not actually be able to be like, this is exactly what this is. And so when I did a search, kind of looking at how this has been defined both in scientific literature and in publications and by like Olympic committees for nations and all of that, this was one of the best definitions I found. And this is actually put out by Project Play, who many of you guys are probably familiar with from their recent involvement here in Kansas City. Physical literacy is the ability, confidence, and desire to be physically active for life. As a physician and as a sports medicine doctor, right, I don't care if my patients, if our community all go on to be D1 Olympic level athletes. That is not the goal. The goal is that we get these kids to a point where they enjoy being active and want to continue doing that and use that as a way to continue being healthy for life. And so we're going to break this down just a little bit, right? Talking about ability. That is competence in some of the fundamental movements that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. That is being overall fit enough to participate in activity as well. And then that ability allows you to do a lot of different activities. One of the things I spend a lot of time talking with kids about is, yes, right now, you basically may only do baseball. But there will come a time in your life where you are not playing baseball competitively all the time, unless you're a professional baseball player. But most of them are not, right? And so knowing how to do physical activity outside of a single sport is something that's super important. We talk about confidence, the belief intrinsically that they can participate. This is also an area where we have to think about access. Access for differently abled kids, access for differently abled adults to participate in physical activity as well, and then also the encouragement to do things. And then lastly, desire, right? Thinking about intrinsic enthusiasm, developing early positive experiences with physical activity, and as a pediatrician, focusing a lot on making these activities fun, and opportunities for families to bond as part of this as well. When we think about physical literacy, I like to think of it as a developmental process, right? As a pediatrician, we talk a lot about development. You know, you go from being a newborn who really cries, sleeps, and poops to being an adult. And it's the same thing we see in several other domains, right? When we think about literacy, we start with letters, then we form words and sentences. When we think about math, it's numbers, and then you can work up to addition, subtraction, fractions, and then algebra and calculus. Or as a musician, right? You start with notes, and then you can form melodies, and then you can form entire pieces of music. It's the same thing when we think about physical literacy. We have building blocks of fundamental movement skills that then progress into sequences and then sport-specific skills and behaviors. So when we think about fundamental movement skills, I've talked about these a lot already. They really kind of come in 3 different categories. We start with skills of stabilization, right? Balancing, the ability to, at one point, you know, stop and change direction and to dodge things coming at you, which I don't know if dodgeball gets played a whole bunch in elementary school anymore, but a very useful skill, at least when I was in elementary school, right? Then we think about locomotion skills, walking, running, and jumping, and skills of object manipulation, right? So catching and throwing and kicking. As we think about these, you know, the literature is kind of all over the place of what exactly fundamental movement skills are. But over and over, we see these 3 themes, right? We have stabilization, we have locomotion, and we have manipulation, right? If we look at this, we see a variety of things, right? Underhand, overhead throwing, kicking, all skills in object manipulation. Hopping, leaping, swinging, all of these is moving our bodies, and then lots of things as far as stability, rolling and climbing. And I think you guys can understand how all of these skills are particularly relevant when we talk about sport participation, right? Another conversation I have a lot with, especially my high school athletes, when I tell them, hey, you need to sit out for a little bit or you're going to break yourself worse, is I care far more about your ability to play catch with your kid 20 years in the future than I care about your ability to play in this baseball game tomorrow. And, you know, that is something that as teenagers, they don't always have the, like, you know, formal operations to be able to fully appreciate. But that is what my goal is. And I think that is what, as a community and as adults who are invested in the care of children, I think that is what our goal should be as well. I include this not because I completely agree with it, but because I think that it is useful to kind of think of this as a framework, especially for the introduction of some of these fundamental skills. Really, as we look at it, basically all of the fundamental skills are introduced by age 2. Now, the mast is when you're supposed to have this skill mastered, and that's where I think this chart is wrong, right? I mean, like, I don't know a 3-year-old who I would ever say has mastered kicking. I mean, they might be good at it, but mastery, I think, is a word is hard. Also, I would say I'm not 100% sure what a 2-hand sidearm strike is, but I would be willing to bet I have not mastered that, and I am certainly older than 5. So I think the introduction of the idea, however, is important. The earlier we introduce these skills, the better likelihood we have of sustained uptake and sustained participation in physical activity across their life. Kind of think about the process of developing stabilization, right? By 4 months, the average kid holds their head steady. By 9 months, they can sit unsupported. By 12 months, they start pulling to stand and moving. These are the earliest milestones of some of these fundamental movements. As we then continue and talk about really the locomotion milestones, by 18 months, you know, that is when we expect children to be walking independently. I know for many of us, that may sound like, wow, that's really late. They recently changed a lot of these milestones, so be aware of that as well. 24 months, you know, starting to run, climb stairs. 30 months, we're jumping. By 5 years, hopping on 1 foot. I think if we think about early childhood education, this is an area where we need to recognize some of these milestones and be able to tailor some of our programming and interventions to recognizing what kids should be expected to do at each point. But then also, if we can help advance that development and provide activities to allow for the development of these skills, that is a good use of our time. Lastly, as we think about manipulation, right? I think manipulation really begins as early as 9 months with moving objects between your hands, right? If you can't move objects between your hands, you're never going to be able to catch, right? And so then progressing to kicking a ball, catching a large ball most of the time, right? That's another area where I'm like, do 4-year-olds really do that? That's what they say. But I don't know that I always catch a large ball most of the time, truthfully. There's a reason my sport in high school was cross country. I was not good at catching. I think here we have to also stop and talk about what the role of play is, especially in early childhood, right? The recommendations are for young children to have at least 1 hour a day of active play. We know that that increases their creativity. We know that physical play enhances executive function, right? So when we're thinking about school environments, physical activity integrated as part of the curriculum is something that can actually enhance academic ability as well. We know that increased outdoor playtime in Head Start programs leads to decreased BMI, which, while not a perfect measure of anything, right, is a surrogate we can consider as a marker of health. And then we also know that children tend to pay more attention in class after free play than they do after PE. So it's not just activity, it is that free ability to interact with their environment and move according to their desires that pays off some of these benefits. As we think about developing physical literacy at the very beginning of life in infancy, we think of at least 30 minutes of tummy time a day. You know, we can encourage crawling by placing toys in a position where the kid wants to reach for them, right? That is something we are doing a whole bunch at home right now because our little baby, a little lazy, doesn't really want to move. But also, he is the firstborn child, so he doesn't really need to. He screams and he has 2 peasants who will come pick him up. We also think about creating safe environments, right? That is something I talk a lot about as a pediatrician too, right? You want a space that is safe for your child to explore, right? If you have to continually be monitoring them and be like, no, you can't do that here, that isn't going to encourage their development, and it's going to make you as a parent really, really frustrated. Same thing in an early childhood setting as well, right? If the environment is not safe for the kid to run around and do what they want, then, well, it's going to be a lot of frustration trying to redirect them and contain them, right? When we think about toddlers and preschoolers, some of the easiest things to do, right? Tag, go visit that park, play on the playground, right? Honestly, then, you know, a lot of times parents can be like, I just sort of have to step back and supervise and make sure they don't die. But yeah, playgrounds are pretty safe for kids unless they're going to fall. Playing catch with large balls, you know, playing a version of catch where you turn your arms into a big basket, playing soccer. These are all things, or soccer. These are all things that you can do really early in life to kind of help get these kids developing some of these fundamental movement skills. And then as we get even older, right, into elementary school, thinking about encouraging fun, letting them participate in preferred activities, and a focus on active transportation, right? So can we walk to the ice cream shop over the summer instead of driving there? Can we bike, right? Of course, there are infrastructure limitations depending on where you are and, you know, the safety of your environment that maybe affect the ability of you to participate in active transportation. And that is, infrastructure and safety is something that underpins the entirety of this conversation, but is not something we're going to focus a whole bunch in this discussion because it's a little bit outside its scope. Really playing throwing and catching games, right? One of my favorite childhood games was the water balloon toss. I don't know if you guys remember that, right? But that is both throwing and catching, and in the summer is a pretty nice way to cool off. Learning how to fall safely, tucking your head, tucking your arms when you're falling, hopscotch and jump rope, learning how to ride a bike, and doing practice baseball type stuff with a plastic ball and bat. These are all ways, and really inexpensive, easy ways, that we can help elementary schoolers develop physical literacy. Another way for elementary schools is something called fundamental integrative training. This is something that was really kind of pioneered by a guy named Avery Feigenbaum, who's published a lot on this topic. These are developmentally appropriate strength programming for young children. The goal is to increase their physical activity. I will emphasize, I capitalize letters on purpose here, right? The goal is to make this a fun activity for these kids to participate in. But it's important to realize that to do this, right, they have to be able to follow directions, right? If they're a kid who does not yet know how to follow directions, these aren't something that you're going to be able to do very well. I included an example of one of these programs that he published, right? This is all based on animal movements, right? Animals are a super easy way to contextualize some movement patterns for kids. And as we look at this, right, I just excerpted some from his paper, honestly. We have 4 different animals that we are going to move like. And then you have different levels that you can progress through as the kid develops additional skills, right? So you can start at level 1, lifting hands off the floor while planking. And then you can lift your hand to the opposite shoulder while planking. Those are all ways to move like a crocodile, and you can use that idea of the crocodile to help get the kid engaged. But what these activities are also doing is they are developing some of those fundamental movement skills in a developmentally appropriate and fun way for the kid. I don't think a conversation about physical literacy is complete without talking a little bit about athlete development, right? We've already talked about how the main goal is not, high-level athletic participation throughout your life. But as we think about the segue from early childhood into elementary and middle school and high school, athlete development is really the continuation of the development of those fundamental movement skills. There are several different models of athlete development. We are going to talk about a couple today. We're going to start with the long-term athlete development model that comes to us out of Canada. The reason I'm starting with this one is because I feel like this one is a little bit more intuitive. We will talk about the American athlete development model as well in just a little bit, and I'll explain why I chose to focus a little bit more on this one then. But it's several steps, right? We start with an active start. Early childhood beginning, we start with fundamental movement skills, and then you progress into learning how to train, training to train, and then you begin entering into competition and then training to win. And then, of course, we talk about the ultimate goal, right, which is being active for life, right? If we think about this longitudinally and developmentally, right, that is where we want kids to end up. We want them to be active for life, right? It's the same thing why we talk about, hey, don't start smoking, because we don't want them to smoke when they're adults either. This is the process by which we help get kids moving and hopefully stay moving throughout the rest of their life. The active start phase is really early on in life, right? We're talking birth to kindergarten. The goal is to make play and activity exciting and fun, playing a little bit every hour. These kids don't really need coaching outside if they need an adult supervising sometimes to make sure they don't die, because, that's something children occasionally try to do. They do things, they try to fall off things, you sometimes need someone to be like, oh, let's hold off on that just a little bit. But the goal is unstructured access to a variety of toys, exploring risk without anybody losing their minds who's supervising them. And then really the ability to develop some of that executive function and the ability to make decisions about what they want to do. What I think is really important here is when we look at this pie chart, right? We see only about a quarter of this should be play led by an adult. The rest of it should be go play. Do what you want, run around, here are your resources, choose how you're going to use them. And what we know is that ability allows the kid to develop imagination, allows them to develop creativity, and allows them to develop the ability to make decisions on what they are going to do. Next, we talk about the fundamentals stage. This is where the ages break off a little bit between our boys and our girls, right? The reason for that is onset of puberty, and we'll discuss that a little bit later as it does play a role. But we know girls tend to start puberty earlier than boys, which is why the time frames are different. The goal here is fun. It's inclusion of every kid who wants to participate, and it's a multi-sport focus. Focusing on developing fundamental movement skills, really focusing on those ABCs, agility, balance, and coordination. You can do a little bit of speed training, but it's not like we're trying to make them run really long races really fast yet. They're still very, very small. So we're speed training in short little bursts, 5 seconds, right? Let's see if we can race to the end of the block, right? We're doing things like that at this stage. And then the goal is multi-sport participation for about 4 to 10 weeks each, right? We're talking short seasons corresponding with pretty close to the kid's attention span, right? Also, as a pediatrician, corresponding to mine is about that long too. As we think about this, right, we have a limited amount of instruction, true structured coaching, and then some adult-led free play, but still 50% of what kids should be doing as part of this is free play instead of adult-led play. Next, we move into the more learning to train, right? That's when we're in our preteen years as we're developing more sport-specific skills. We continue developing those fundamental motor skills, again, focusing on making it fun. Another important thing that helps prevent injuries at this time is really working on flexibility, right? When you get into that early teenage period, I see a lot of kids in clinic because their bones have grown faster than their muscles, and so they are super inflexible, and they hurt themselves because of how inflexible they are. And so this is a good time to train flexibility before they kind of hit that growth spurt where they're growing super, super fast and their muscles don't quite even up with their bones just yet, to help prevent them from breaking off various parts of their body as they're sprinting and running track and doing stuff like that. The goal here is sport participation a few times a week. Still, we're letting every child learn and play. And this is really where you start some of those like fundamental athletic training concepts, right? That's when you're really going to focus on a warm up and a cool down is in this stage. This is also when you can introduce a little bit of competition, right? The goal here is not making this uber competitive, right? But using competition as a way to let the kids continue to play. And of course, you want it to be a competition because that has a reward in and of itself for the developing athlete. But the goal itself is not competition, but continuing to get better. Now in that early adolescent, early pubertal time, we start training to train, right? When you have the surge of hormones with puberty, that is when you can really begin developing muscle mass, really start honing some sport-specific skills. This is kind of where, ideally, we start to see the development of some specialization, right, in a particular sport. We know that there are some sports where it's a little bit better to specialize earlier. We're not going to get into all of that. But this is kind of the ideal stage. And before this, the goal is doing a whole bunch of different things all the time to develop all the different parts of your body and all different skills. This stage really begins with the adolescent growth spurt. We're focusing on flexibility, we're focusing on posture, and we're focusing on technique. In addition to the warm up and cool down, this is where you can add in periodization, right? We're working on this right now. Now we're resting. Now we're working on this. This is also a good time to start introducing weight training. Now, you don't have to wait until now, but this is when classically it begins a lot. You know, we kind of see this middle school, high school age as a big time when young athletes really start lifting weights as part of their training. And so that's reasonable to do, but there needs to be a focus on ensuring correct form, correct technique to help prevent injuries and encourage them to continue participating. This is another area where I think that preference matters too, right? So if we're talking about weight training, letting kids a lot of the time do some weights that they like lifting is maybe better than making every single kid do squats, deadlifts, and cleans, right? And so things to think about, differentiating what we're trying to do from a training perspective based on the preferences of each individual kid and their general activity. I want to pause here and talk about, the role of recovery and meaningful competition, right? The goal, both from an injury prevention perspective and from a development perspective, is we increase duration, we increase volume, and we increase intensity. We don't go from nothing to, wow, I'm running a marathon every day, right? That is not helpful for injury prevention, and it doesn't really help them develop as young athletes. Focusing our training based on their stage of development, right? We have talked as we've moved through this model that there are different skills that you can begin to introduce at each age. And then recognition of the importance of recovery. This train to train stage is where we really need to start talking with kids about what recovering looks like. Recognizing and adding in competition, but that supports what we're doing in practice. Again, because the goal here is training and getting better more than it is truly competition. The goal is allowing equal competition, and this is a time where, from a population perspective, right, you can travel maybe a little bit, but, well, I'm pretty sure I have a slide on this later. If not, we'll talk about it later. Close competition, decreasing travel and cost is a way we can improve access to sports and sport participation for kids, right? It's fine if you were traveling from Overland Park to Kansas City to compete, right? It gets a lot harder if you're traveling from Overland Park to Washington, D.C. to compete, right? And I think we all know lots of, especially club sport athletes, are participating in that amount of travel all the time. And that is very difficult at this early age as well. And again, I think we'll talk about that a little bit more later. As we now move into this focusing on competition stage, we're training to compete. This is that pubertal growth spurt and beyond. We see lots of specialization. Our training is designed to maximize athletic development, right? This is when, we double down on that warm up, on that cool down from injury prevention, where we really try to develop some of those ethical skills of sporting participation as well. We see training frequency increases a lot, right? We're looking at 9 to 12 times a week. Right? Now, that doesn't mean that you're practicing 3 hours, 9 to 12 times a week, right? That is doing things to make you better 9 to 12 times, right? A lot of times these are close to full-time athletes. So this is where the pathways kind of diverge, right? This is not necessarily a stage that every child has to go through, right? If they skip training to compete and training to win, that is reasonable, right? Not every kid is going to be a full-time athlete. What we see a lot with high school athletes is it's kind of close to that though, right? They go to school and then they do their sport, and that is fine. But that is different from some of the kids I've also seen where they cut off their school early so they can do their sport, right? Not every kid necessarily has to be a full-time athlete training with this much intensity to continue athletic development and be active for life. As you think about training to win, right, again, we're optimizing performance. This is where you really bring in a whole bunch of other people, right? You have sports nutritionists and sports psychologists and sports scientists all kind of working together. They're training a lot, right? These are absolutely full-time athletes. They train year-round. They have scheduled peaks. And these are the kids who are participating in, like, national championships for youth, right? Or going to the Olympics, right? This is not something every kid gets to either, and that is fine. Our goal is not necessarily that every kid ends up here. Lastly, active for life, right? At some point, basically everyone transitions from being an active participant all the time in sports to more, participating for fun and for lifelong enjoyment, right? This is where also you can transition from being an athlete to being somebody who will help support that, right? As an official, a coach, as a sports scientist, as a physical therapist, athletic trainer, any of that type of stuff. Someone who runs a sports organization, right? Those are all ways to transition into being active for life, continuing involvement in sports and physical activity, but stepping back from that active competition role, right? One of the things I also talk a lot about in clinic, right, is there are some problems that my patients have that are because they have an adult who's telling them what to do, right? When, if you're swimming by yourself and your shoulder starts hurting a whole bunch, you're just gonna stop and rest for a little bit, right? And that is fine as well. And that is really the goal of this stage, right? Continuing to be active, competing if you want to, right? Like, yeah, go run a 5K Thanksgiving morning. Not sure why you want to run a 5K Thanksgiving morning. I like sleeping in Thanksgiving morning, but people do. One of my best friends does. I don't understand, but that's all right. And continuing that enjoyment of participation. So we talked about the long-term athletic development model that comes to us out of Canada, right? I think it breaks it down in a way that makes more sense to my brain, right? It's really stepwise progression, right? But we also live in the United States. And so many of our athletes are participating in USA affiliated sports, USA soccer, USA gymnastics, whatever the individual sport might be. And so I think this is also something we need to understand. Rather than having as many steps, this has 5. The goal, again, is universal access to sport, especially early on, developmentally appropriate activities to emphasize skills, multiple sport participation, and being fun, engaging, and progressive. One thing that the American development model really encourages is quality coaching for all ages, right? Making sure that we are developing safe sporting environments, that we are trying to prevent injuries, and that we're really trying to develop the skills of the athletes that the coaches are taking care of. This is a 5-stage model, right? We start with discover, learn, and play, right? The big goal of early childhood, kind of into middle childhood, maybe early adolescence. And then jump into developing and challenging after they've developed a little bit of skills, training and competing. And then one thing I do really like about the American development model is it diverges there, right? We then have excel for high performance, or just participate and succeed. Like, I want to do this because it's fun and I enjoy it, versus I want to do this because I want to be in the Olympics, right? Both are valid, but they're different goals, and how we interact with the athlete is different based on their desire. And then much like in the long-term athlete development model, transitioning at some point into thriving and mentoring, helping develop the skills of younger athletes and continuing to be active throughout life. I want to talk now a little bit about physical activity guidelines, because I think that is something that kind of rounds out this conversation, and we are coming real close to home plate here, just in case you guys are wondering. For infants, the goal is daily activity, multiple segments, right? We talked about tummy time, but doing tummy time, practicing sitting, doing all of that for a few minutes, lots of times every day is the goal. For toddlers, our goal is like 3 hours of active play every day. Really, for toddlers and preschoolers, it's about the same. The only difference is they get a little bit older there, right? You can start adding in about 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity for these kids, right? Now, normally, you don't have to add that in. Toddlers are more than willing to do that themselves. They have no problem running around sprinting for a couple hours, right? And then by the time we kind of get into the elementary school age and beyond, right, we're talking 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity, really focusing on aerobic activity, trying to have that vigorous activity at least 3 days a week, and then also working on some strengthening exercises at least 3 days a week. These are from the Physical Activity Guidelines for Americans. I suspect these will probably... There will probably be an update in the nearish future of these. Whether or not anything changes is a different question, but I suspect there'll be another publication, because this is from 2018, which we're coming up on that being about a decade ago, which is kind of crazy to think about. I want to talk just a little bit about resistance training. We talked about fundamental integrative training earlier, but I think what's important, because this is a question I get a lot too, is when can my kids start like doing some weight and resistance stuff? The answer is if they can follow directions and do sports, they can do some of that, right? We can use that fundamental integrative training to really introduce this concept, especially in early childhood, but the goal is addressing major muscle groups, right? It's important to recognize that strength gains in children who have not yet hit puberty are different than children who have hit puberty. And so setting expectations for everyone, like your 7-year-old is not necessarily going to get jacked, is important because sometimes parents might expect that, and recognizing that won't happen. But also recognizing that strength gains really require doing this a few times a week. It requires consistency even in childhood. This is also an area where prehabilitation can help prevent injuries too. So as we're setting kids up for a lifetime of participation, we can be like, hey, here are some exercises that you can do to help prevent injury. The FIFA 11 Plus was initially designed for like ACL injury prevention, but that's exactly what this is, right? That is prehabilitation, designing to prevent overuse injuries. And so exercises that really focus on core strengthening, gluteal strengthening, and hamstring strengthening are things that are going to help prevent lower extremity problems. Core strengthening in general is going to help prevent lots of sports injuries and overuse injuries as well. When we talk about intensive training and specialization, right, we know multiple sport participation decreases injury, stress, and burnout. We know that delayed specialization in most sports makes you better, actually, than the kids who, I have only done baseball from the time I am 5. It's baseball season, kind of. That's why I'm using baseball a lot. As I'm seeing a lot of baseball players right now and having this conversation a lot. We know that early diversity and later specialization tends to increase fitness across the lifespan, probably by decreasing burnout. And then the official recommendation is actually 3 months off each year from a particular sport. Now, that doesn't have to be a 3-month block. It can be a 1-month block 3 times a year. But I think that is an important thing for us to be aware of as we're developing programs, as we're talking to adults, as we're making decisions about what we want our children to be involved in, right? And then also, I think it's important, 1 to 2 days off per week from any particular sport is also important. The importance of rest is not something that can be overstated, both for the emotional, physical, and mental development of a kid. When we talk about overtraining, right, that's increased training load without adequate recovery. It leads to decreased performance. Some people think kids are maybe overtraining at least like 35%. That's a third of kids. And here is really kind of where some of those weekend tournaments and year-round participation really can kind of cause problems, right? So when you have 2 back-to-back weekend tournaments and practice basically that whole week, right? That is how many days in a row without a day off. I also think about what professional athletes do, right? Professional athletes at any level do not play 6 games in a day. Like, that's just not really what they do. But that is sometimes what we are asking our pediatric athletes to do, especially with weekend tournaments. And so that is something to at least be cognizant of as we're talking to kids, as we're designing sports programs, right? Is that is, while those can be super fun, right? That is not something we want to be the bulk of the participation for these kids. One of the ways to prevent overtraining, only 1 sport per day, right? This is not foolproof, and that's sometimes hard to do. But if you're doing 1 sport a day, you are likely decreasing your training volume to the point where you can help prevent some of this. I now want to talk about the state of play in Kansas City, right? This was recently published by the Aspen Institute. It is really a very, very well done report. I've read it. They did a very good job. But what we see is that throughout the Kansas City area, 20% of kids meet physical activity guidelines. That's 1/5. If we're talking about school-based grades, we're getting an F as far as making sure our kids are active. We're actually getting a very, very low F, right? But we also know there are lots of barriers, right? Kids have to be able to get there. Transportation's a problem. We don't necessarily have as much access for kids with disabilities as we would like as well. There are not a lot of recreational and school sports that are available to every single kid, right? You can try out for your school team, but a lot of times school teams, especially in this area, have to cut kids. And so that's something to think about too. And then of course the high cost of competitive sports in this competitive sports environment that we find ourselves. These are all barriers to helping kids participate in sports throughout their lifetime. I also think it's important to talk about some diversity issues at play here, right? We know from data that African American and Hispanic youth are, on average, less active than white children. We know that girls starting as early as age 9 decrease their physical activity compared to boys. We've talked about this already. Children with special healthcare needs, kids with disabilities, they are less active than are their normally abled peers. We know that low-income families have a harder time getting their kids physically active, and that's probably because of some of the costs associated with participation in sport, especially like we've talked about a little bit in the club sport versus recreational sport, really high cost, high travel participation. And then interestingly, youth in the South are also less physically active than youth in the rest of the country. Now, in this particular report, it didn't explicitly say where the South began. My wife's family is from Wisconsin, and they would say, well, you're in North Missouri, that's the South. And I'm like, that's maybe a little aggressive, but I think it's useful to think about, right? Like, there are some cultural similarities between where we are and the South as well, whether or not you call us part of the South. And so thinking about that our kids may be even less active than kids in other parts of the country too. This was a really interesting study talking about gaps in physical literacy, right? Talks about early childhood educators. They know physical literacy matters, but they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to develop these skills for kids. We know that PE teachers in elementary school, despite their job, don't necessarily have super high levels of physical literacy. And if you aren't super competent in something, like if you don't have lots of physical literacy yourself, how are you going to teach kids to do this, right? We know that parents care about physical literacy too. They want to implement it, but they don't know how, right? They have lots of other things they have to do, like making sure their kid is fed and clothed. And then parents, we found also, don't really know whose job it is to make their kids active, right? And so these are some gaps that we can address. A lot of this has been laying some groundwork as we kind of work into some things we can do to improve this, right? I'm going to be very honest with you, right? This is not going to be groundbreaking. These are just things that we can think about and then develop solutions for based on our individual context, right? But developing physical literacy really is teamwork between all of these people, right? It is the job of parents, it is the job of schools, it's the job of community organizations, and it is the job of policymakers at various levels, whether that's health department, whether that is, city council or state government or the United States Congress, right? These are all things, all people who need to work together to get kids moving. When we think about the role of parents, right, they're the first people to develop these skills, the first people to model activity. Parents can allow free play. They can introduce kids to organized sports pretty early on in life, around 6. We know that more parental support for physical activity equals more child physical activity. Again, I'm sure that is not groundbreaking for anybody, right? But we also know that parents create safe environments for participation, right? If kids do not feel safe for whatever reason while they're participating in sport, they're going to try to stop. And so parents bear a lot of the responsibility for making sure that participation in sports is safe. And I don't necessarily mean physically safe. I mean like emotionally and safe from abuse and all of that type of stuff. As we think about schools, really probably the primary purpose of PE class should be developing these physical literacy skills, right? If we zoom out, right? Yeah, capture the flag is super fun, but teaching kids how to play capture the flag isn't probably what the goal of any PE teacher is, right? And so developing PE curricula to promote enjoyment, to promote the development of those fundamental skills is important. Encouraging active classrooms as much as we can, right? I substitute taught a lot during my 4th year of medical school, and there were lots of brain breaks we took. That was something that a lot of schools have really started integrating more than we will sit in rows all day and listen to me teach all day, which I think is great. And continuing to increase that is something that I think will pay dividends both in academic performance, but also in physical literacy for kids. One thing I think we potentially can still improve on is not withholding physical activity as a punishment, though, right? What is one of the first punishments for kids when they've been misbehaving in school is you're missing recess, right? Which I can understand why that's the thought, right? You're trying to take away something that the kid enjoys. But instead, if we could modify that and be like, your job is now walking laps at recess. That is something, a way you can modify it. You can still, try to correct the behavior without withholding physical activity. And then also, it's important to recognize schools are, in general, a safe place for kids to engage in activity, right? They have the resources, they have the tools, they are relatively well insulated, and so they are a pretty safe place and so schools can do a lot of work in developing physical literacy skills. Next, as we think about athletic and community organizations, right? Investing in coaching training, which it sounds like some of the people in this room are doing, which is great. Also, this whole safe sport environment I've talked about a lot, right? That's everybody's job. I have lots of conversations about, as adults, it is our job to protect children, full stop. Like that is just what it is. As a pediatrician, that is my job. As teachers, that's our job. That's everybody's job, right? Using existing resources to kind of combine competitive and recreational sport participation, right? If you have a field, let's share it and let's use it. Consider multi-sport programming, and ensuring that there's no cut programming is useful as well. And then finally, role of policymakers, right? School districts can open facilities for recreational sports, investing in green spaces and infrastructure to allow that active play, and then really trying to develop lifespan sport programming, right? That is something that is kind of a deficit in the Kansas City area, right? We have some early kid sports, and then we transition to school sports, and then kind of like, there are some sports for adults, but like it falls off pretty sharply, right? And so that is something that we can do. And also allocating budget for programming that improves physical literacy is something that policymakers can do as well. I have a whole bunch of references here. If you're interested in any of these topics more, I'm happy to tell you where I got some of the information. And thank you so much.
Let's do an active applause for, let's stand up. And happy to take some questions, I assume?
Yeah, sure.
Just maybe repeat the questions.
Yeah. I don't promise to have answers, but I'm happy to try. Yeah.
Just a comment. I'm blessed to have a granddaughter who's an elite athlete.
Yeah.
And she fell into a trap, and I fell into a trap with her. She was encouraged by the program she was committed to in college to play multiple sports, which made sense. To avoid developing special muscle groups was the idea. However, what I discovered was you need those special muscle groups to participate in those various sports at an elite level.
Yes.
The seasons ended up overlapping. She missed a preseason strength training for for a particular sport and suffered a major injury as a result of that. So it was a hidden threat that I was unaware of. And I don't necessarily have an answer to it, but I would alert everyone to be aware of it. She went from one sport, stepped into the other sport full speed at a very elite level and ended up injuring herself because she didn't have the special muscle group necessary to compete in that sport.
Right. And that is super important, right? Recognizing the balance that we have to walk, right? Especially with like more elite level athletic competition, right? There are some things you have to do to be successful at that level. And while, yes, I think multi-sport participation, developing other muscle groups still is important, right? You also have to continue to focus on what you're desiring to do more, right? Because when you don't, you do fall into that trap, right? And so I think as we think about different levels of athletic participation, whether that's recreational, school, competitive, like some of that more elite level athletic participation too, we have to tailor our approach based on that. Now, from a community perspective, right, where should we put our focus? That's a different question, and that I think is up for debate. I would argue probably more at the recreational level. From a community focus, recreational and school is probably where we will reap the most rewards. But recognizing that those who are involved in wanting to get kids moving are involved in lots of different levels is important too. Yeah.
I think the presentation is good. As you just mentioned, I think most children will be involved and most will not compete or progress to the elite level. So when my kids were small, many years ago, I, like many people, became their coach or assistant coach. I never played soccer or didn't know one of the coaches. Would have probably benefited from some resources for that type of position. Are those things available these days? I suppose now you can go online and find support or at least instructions for the very amateur parent coach.
Yeah, so that's actually a really great question. And Robin was reminding me I should probably repeat some of the questions, right? For parents who don't necessarily have a whole bunch of experience stepping into coaching roles, right? Like what resources are available to kind of help them? Number one, I think a lot of the community organizations that help run sports leagues have started to take more of an interest in that topic as well, recognizing you need coaches and not all of them will have participated in that sport at any level. Potentially, right? Especially when you're talking about really early age coaching. I also think, honestly, the USA sports organizations have done a pretty good job of this too. So like USA Soccer are like the national governing boards of each sport that participates in like the Olympic level stuff. They have actually started publishing some of this stuff too, like coaching resources for young athletes, which I think is great. We'll be honest, right? I have also, in addition to talking a lot about baseball, I've talked a lot about soccer recently. But that's because I do some work with the Sporting Kansas City Developmental Academy too. And so I've read more of the stuff for soccer than I have some of the other sports, which is why I use them as an example. But I know it exists elsewhere too, for some of the other sports too. And so if that is something someone's interested in, right, you can Google USA pickleball or whatever. And a lot of times they actually will have some coaching resources available for people to really help get kids involved and interested and kind of taught about the sport as well. Also, they will frequently have some primers for rules for parents who may not know them. Very like Ted Lasso offsides, right? But yeah, so I think those are great resources and they're kind of starting to come out. I can't promise they're available for absolutely every single sport because I haven't looked, but I'm glad that that is something that is starting to be published.
I know Kelly is a soccer coach, youth soccer coach, and I know your organization or the league provides you with some training, right? Can you maybe?
Yeah, I coach for Sporting Brookside.
Oh, yeah, Nick.
In Little Ones.
Yeah.
So, and they have collected a bunch of resources for coaching on their like app. And it's even helpful for me being a person that's played my entire life. So I think they do a pretty good job, a lot of videos and stuff.
For reference, actually, Sporting Brookside, there is a pediatric sports medicine conference that was in Columbus, Ohio, and Nick Garcia runs Sporting Brookside. I don't know if you guys know him, but he was actually one of the presenters there because they were talking about, like, you know, developing recreational sports opportunities for kids, and he was asked to help speak at that. So he is potentially a good resource if, you know, that is something you were very interested in, if you guys do not know who he is. I'll throw that out there because you mentioned that. But I also think what you said is super important to realize too, right? There's a difference between being good at something and being able to teach someone else how to be good at something. Those are not the same skill, right? Some of the best, I'll use musicians as an example, best musicians in the world are not good teachers, right? Some really brilliant mathematicians should not be teaching anybody how to do math either, right? There are different skills, right? And there's overlap, but they're not the same.
Disconnect here is that everything we're doing now isn't working. We have only 20% of the kids getting 60 minutes a day. So it has, in fact, I love Nick Garcia. I love what Brookside Soccer is trying to do. It's just not enough. We're just not doing enough. You didn't speak to mental health and well-being. Is there a part of this that is about the psychological impact physical activity has on kids in their brains and their development, and the science behind what it means to have a kid get 60 minutes a day and why doctors aren't prescribing that?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I didn't talk about that as part of this presentation, but yes. What do we know about physical activity in developing brains, right? It decreases anxiety, it decreases depression, right? There is actually a recent, like, really pretty high quality study that talks about the role of physical activity as a treatment for depression in adults, right? One of the problems is, you know, when treating kids, a lot of people don't study kids, right? But no, those are all things that we know, right? Activity, probably the more activity, the better, leads to better mental health outcomes from both a depression, anxiety perspective. But something we care a lot about in a pediatric population too is, like, it also makes you better at school, right? It improves ability to focus. It improves the way that your brain functions and is able to process information. And so it makes it easier to learn when you are active. And so really integrating some of that activity into school settings and all of those things, absolutely something that is important.
But we're going the opposite direction. We're taking it out of schools, and that doesn't teach physical literacy. And
correct.
We're not mad enough. Yes.
Bill's mad.
Right?
I noticed your answer with the physical activity. I would add to that, competitive activity brings along stresses that are mentally taxing in a major way. And one other comment, just maybe run up a warning flag. I coached for decades.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that school environments are not entirely safe. That's one thing that I would question. I can give you example after example with this. I will say to the parents in the room, you watch out for your kids. Always.
100%. And that is absolutely true. When I talked about the safety of schools, right, that was more of a general statement. We all know examples, right? I would still posit that in general, schools provide a safe avenue, right? Even if that is you're participating inside of the school building where they have resources and you're not running out on the street potentially. But yes, you are 100% correct, right? There are a million examples, I'm sure all of us know some, of where schools were not actually a safe environment for children. Yes, ma'am. Oh, either one.
My background is in education, right? That's one of the reasons stuff. And I was a classroom teacher for, actually early childhood teacher for about 10 years. And everything you're saying, I mean, brain breaks, like, you know, I used to have my kiddos, like, we'd go outside, we'd be moving, we'd, you know, and animal movements is a good way to teach you, you know, the whole deal, everything. From an educator's perspective, is it generally, I don't know, if I'm answering the question correctly, but is it generally in the pediatric world or in the health world, is it becoming more and more common to talk to parents about getting their kiddos, you know, more active and that sort of thing? I mean, I realize that might be like but you know what I mean? Because I, like, as a teacher, like, I mean, I would have my kiddos like be jumping, or, you know, I'd have kiddos in the back who were like moving around, like while I'm doing a story or whatever, because
that's how they process information, right? They were
Yes.
learners. And so I had kiddos in my classroom probably looked very disorganized, but from like a, you know, from like the admin looking in. But as a teacher, like my kiddos were, you could, you know, they were learning in the way, and I worked at a private school, so I had every resource imaginable. But I'm just curious, like if that's sort of the trend in, because I know like in education, that's the trend is to like have those brain breaks, and trying to explain that to parents and administrators primarily is very difficult because they're used to the, you know, sit down, do a worksheet, whereas that's not the best way to learn.
Right.
So I don't know that.
No, I think I understand. And if I start answering a question you didn't ask, just interrupt me. Okay. No, so I think that your question, right, really focusing on like the role of the healthcare system in talking about the development of physical literacy, right? I would say yes, that is something that all of us are absolutely trying to do, right? I think that much like in the world of education, I can say this as someone whose wife was a teacher, doctors are also asked frequently to do more with a little bit less, right? Like we have to do more in less time. And so, you know, at some point, right, something has to give, right? I know that there were times, right? So my general pediatrics clinic was Children's Mercy Broadway, right? Lots and lots of really underserved kids are coming there, right? A population in general, right, with pretty low health literacy, like I have to explain really foundational concepts. And so if I talk about, you know, trying to get your kid active, right, that I have to explain what that means exactly. And there are some times where if, you know, this kid and their family no longer have a house, right? That I talk more about that and getting them resources for that in the time I have than other stuff. So I think, yes, it is something that we all try to do as much as possible. I probably talk about it because it's something I'm interested in, potentially more than some other people. But yeah, it is something we try to talk about. It is the recommendation that it is something that we talk about at every well visit.
I know it's like moving
yes.
that way in the education world.
Yes.
You know, having our kiddos active and having our kiddos have those brain breaks and moving and, you know.
Which is great.
Great. And even, you know, even on the upper education or higher education level. So
yeah.
Just curious if that was like the overall kind of thing in medical life.
I would say yes, right? I can't talk about what everyone's doing, but I would say yes.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And you had a question.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for this. My husband and I can give you 100 examples of how all of our peers, our older siblings, do these competitive sports and just like went into the ground and then now they do nothing and they're like overweight and not healthy. So no surprise, my husband and I are not collegiate athletes, but we are still doing lifelong fitness and we're trying to do that for our child who's about your child's age.
Yeah.
That being said, a lot of it is like school policy. I know I live on Fort Leavenworth. They recognize that a lot of the youth are not actually even able to join the military, the services their parents are in because they're not healthy enough to join. Like, okay, we're gonna think about that. So they've started to open up their sports where we got an email that said, if you're planning on using the school track, please don't come between, I don't know, 2 and 4. We had over 100 kids come for the track and field tryouts. We decided not to cut anyone. 1, we need volunteers, and 2, like, please don't continue to use the track at that time. So like, changing school policy of like, you know what, we're gonna find a way to let everyone who wants to participate. Because then you don't have to worry about, well, what if I don't make it? Well, I'm not gonna try because I may not make it. That's over. You get outside, it doesn't matter if you're walking half the time, you're outside off the phones for 30 minutes. That's way better for you than anything else long-term, whether how far you sprint. So like, maybe like looking at policies around schools as well could help us to like, let's figure out how not to cut anyone who tries this sport. I was on the women's golf team in high school, not because I had ever played golf before, but they needed at least 4 people to have a team. And we had 3 really good female golfers, and I was their warm body. I swear to God, like this is, and I'm so close to my high school golf coach because he knew why I was there for other people, and I developed way more than golfing skills. So just being able to be there and be outside and be present is much more important long term. And I'm still terrible at golf. So thank you for this presentation.
No, absolutely. Thank you guys.
I've got one more question for you if you have time. Great presentation. One thing that, you know, I think people often don't understand is that these fundamental motor skills, and you explained this very well, they don't just naturally occur. There is some guidance and instruction that is involved with them. And it was great you showed that stat that most early childhood education providers know it's important and want to do more within their settings, but don't often know what to do. So I know we've got a really strong ECE sector here. Do you have any recommendations for them, or maybe I'll turn it back to them. Do they have any good ones that they want to share with other people? Like in my ECE that I send my kids to, they're really good at providing outdoor play, but they don't provide any instruction during that time. So I think that's a perfect example of a place that wants to do more, but maybe doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think, and I'll speak from my thoughts and then would love to hear other people's thoughts too, right? I think there are lots of opportunities to do, like, we're going to play a catching game right now. There are lots of ways you can turn a catching game into an educational opportunity too, right? Like, this is maybe a little bit beyond the early childhood level at a certain point, but right, like rhyming words, right? You can kind of teach rhyming and that sort of phonics skill. Like when you catch the ball, you say a word that rhymes with the word I just said. But it can't be the same word. If it is, you're out, right? And you can kind of do that for a long time, and that's, catching and moving and all of that type of stuff, right? I think there are lots of different ways you can play with that idea based on what your goal is.
I'm a big fan of Simon Says.
Yeah, yeah. Simon Says, who hasn't played that game, right? Like everybody knows that. Red light, green light, you could get a whole bunch of, you can make that a learning opportunity too, right? It just takes a little bit of creativity, right? Which again, creativity takes time, and the problem is when you don't have time, it's harder to do, right? Or and resources, right? Time and resources is what's required to like have creative ideas and implement some of this stuff. And if you don't have those things, then that makes it hard.
About those two games, sorry.
No,
What's great about those two games is like they're easy to transition home, right? Like it doesn't require a specialized, ball or whatever. It's an easier way to. Especially with siblings and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you can make a ball out of your old aluminum foil if you have to. Like,
right.
There are lots of abilities to do that.
Were there questions online? Yes. Okay. All right, last question.
Oh, it's not even a question.
Oh.
I came in late, so you maybe already said it, and you're alluding to it right now. I said I coached for decades. I discovered that kids love games.
Oh, yeah.
And to the extent, I actually got to the point that every skill that I taught, I had a game associated with it. And as a result, their effort, the energy just goes off the scale. I can actually give you quantitative data where I went from baseline, just let's do it for fun, for baseline, and then I introduced the game, and their effort doubled the performance as a result of playing a game.
No, 100%. And I did talk about that a little bit earlier, and I'll also be very honest, right? So my wife was an elementary school music teacher, right? How you teach elementary school music is you play games, right? You introduce rhythm by playing games. That is what you do, right? You're doing drumming games. You're playing like hand patting games, right? That's how you do that. You introduce concepts like pitch, high and low by, is this a high note or is this a low note? And you do things like that, right? And that's, I mean, she did lots of squats. But yeah, like those are the ways that work really, really well to introduce concepts and get kids kind of learning about it by, again, improving some of those kinetic skills, because kids we know are kinetic learners. But then the challenge, right, is when you have people who are pushed to do more with less, like in the educational world and coaching, right? So much easier if you can hand to them, here, these are ways to do this. And so opportunities for curriculum development, I think, are also really high.
Great. All right, let's give one more active applause to Dr.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Okay. Now we're going to transition to just some updates, and we'll start with updates from the Kansas City Healthy Lifestyles Collaborative, and then we'll turn it over to everyone else for their updates. So the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan has several sports sector meetings coming up. You can see them here. We won't go through them one by one, but we do have a couple special updates for some of our other sectors. So The healthcare sector, they're extremely active right now. They've got 3 upcoming meetings for the curriculum subsector, Just Walk, and then the overall sector meeting. So any particular announcements that you wanted to share?
Except Just Walk, we are moving to meeting every other month, and we have created an Outlook group. Also, we switched over our curriculum meetings to Outlook as well. So if you're involved in those groups, you'll be receiving an invitation shortly.
Okay, great, excellent. Okay, sports sector, we have kind of one big announcement, and we're actually hosting our sports sector meeting right after this meeting in person. So we'll take a little bathroom break, but otherwise we're going to meet today at 11:30. So hope you can join us for that. We also are hosting, in partnership with the Aspen Institute, a second event. The first one being last spring 2024's Kansas City Project Play Summit. We are hosting what we're calling a Community Conversation Summit. And that'll be Tuesday, August 19th, here at the Kauffman Foundation Center. It's scheduled from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. We're going to provide breakfast and lunch. The idea is that we are going to this is going to be a participatory event, in addition to some structured learning that we've got planned. It's the target audience is sport and nonprofit administrators, coaches, parents, and adults involved in youth sports. And we're specifically going to explore ideas on how to improve access and quality of sports and play opportunities for Kansas City youth, focusing on collective action. So I think, our State of Play Kansas City report, and anyone who works in youth sports in Kansas City knows it's a very siloed sector, a lot of institutions and organizations working by themselves, and that leaves a lot of youth left in the dark. So we're going to really try to work on collaborative efforts to increase access and quality to youth sports. So there is a QR code if you want to sign up there. We're going to send out lots more information over the coming months as we get closer to that event. The last thing I wanted to show is just a brief agenda, because we are very, very excited that our keynote speaker for the event is Daisha McClam. She is the current Vice President of Community Impact at the Positive Coaching Alliance. She was previously the Director of Project Play Western New York. Her job is to work on national initiatives to increase access and quality to youth sports in the United States. So promises to be a great keynote event. And then we're also going to have workshops around the power of data and communications with the Philadelphia Youth Sports Collaborative, another very successful community-based organization. We've got some Play Like the Champion workshops with our own Piscatello. I should have known that our own Bill Brandmeier is going to actually be leading the conversation with Daisha, so that's going to be exciting. And then there will be also lots of other opportunity for networking and collaboration. So any questions about the August community conversation event? Okay, like I said, you'll hear lots more about that in the coming weeks and months. All right, so now we turn it over to you guys to share what updates you guys might have from your organizations. Anything that you want to share with anyone, any events you've got going on, any ideas for collaboration. And I've looked to Bill because I know Bill's got some things. We'll come back.
We do have a community collaboration that I can speak to.
Bill's got a lot going on. And if you want, you can come up here. You want to do that?
Sure.
Just so you can talk to the microphone for the people on the screen.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning online. I am the sports sector lead along with Pete, co-lead, and I have been working recently on a community collaboration. I had the opportunity to sit in with the Parks and Rec sector last week to share with them an exciting collaboration that I'm working on in Kansas City, Kansas. The Unified Government's Parks and Rec is coming together with a organization called the Foundation for Excellence, which is geared towards the Kansas City, Kansas public school system, helping students with whatever needs they need in order to excel in the classroom and in life. They've established themselves as the primary foundation for the Kansas City, Kansas public school systems. It's run by Ms. Crystal Watson. Crystal has led the organization to really great heights, impacted tons of kids. But she's also running for mayor of Unified Government this time around, and has a lot of great vision for Kansas City, Kansas in particular. She brought on board Samuel Simmons, who is the athletic director of the Kansas City, Kansas public school systems, as we sat down together and talked about the opportunities to impact kids with athletics. You know, he calls them scholar athletes. Scholars is his term, and he sees the link between physical activity, exercise, sports participation, and grades and classroom advancement. We are all working together to begin presenting to kids opportunities to not only have community engagements around sports, but get involved in leagues throughout Kansas City, Kansas through the Parks and Rec system. Our first engagement will be August 9th at the Back to School Fair. We're going to do 3 hours of clinics on the fall sports that the Parks and Rec are involved in. We will be providing kids with the physical activity opportunities, 3 hours of play in volleyball, flag football, and soccer. And the Parks and Rec will be there to sign people up for their leagues, which are the most cost-effective leagues I've found anywhere in the city. It's like $40 for your kid to play for the whole season, and it's an opportunity to get the kids of Kansas City, Kansas, the middle school kids and the later elementary school kids involved in sports. They want to do another event in the fall for winter sports to sign kids up for winter sports, and then another event in the spring during March to sign kids up for the spring sports. And then they want to do summer camps next year. And the Shareways Foundation is partnering with the Kansas City, Kansas Athletic Department, Public School Athletics, for the coaches to lead the clinics, which is a pretty cool deal. So the coaches who have dedicated their lives to serving these kids are actually going to help us create environments and spaces for kids to be safe, but also engage in high-level physical activity and skill development, along with personal development, character development, and some other things. And so that's a really exciting endeavor. We are also hosting a 3-day camp at Hy-Vee Arena. A ready to play camp and clinic. Ready to play the game of life is our kind of slogan. And how do you keep kids ready to play? You get them out there playing, but also instill character development model in camps. At Hy-Vee Arena, the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th of July. I have a 50% discount code for any kid that would like to come. And it's a drop-off camp. It's led by 40 leaders, and Luke Wade, who is he's done a ton for millennials. Luke Wade runs KC Crew, and now he's doing Crew Kids, and so it's a really cool collaboration between an organization that's a for-profit that has really, he has probably 40 to 50 I don't know, 20, maybe 20,000 millennials playing kickball and doing other kinds of fun engagements. He's now focused on kids, and it's really cool to watch. And then the final thing is I have a vision with my partner, Wayman King, to try to provide kids in the Boys and Girls Clubs with career development in sports initiative. And he and I are committed to figuring out a way to do that. That's another collaborative opportunity where we will reach into the sports communities, find professionals and leaders that want to get involved with kids and teach them that there are career opportunities outside of playing sports in life that can take them into quality life experiences, and excited about that too. So that's what sports sector's up to, along with working with Pete with this event in August. We're excited. The event in August is for everyone to come. It is what the Aspen Institute has proposed us to do, is to come together and figure out how we can collaborate. And I appreciate Robin kind of steering the boat and making this all possible. So thank you.
Great. All right. Yes. You can do it back there if you want, or you can come up. Or yeah, project.
I'm with the BMS project, nonprofit. Their BMS hosting, what we call metrics, that we've been a couple years and we're expanding in June, and what it is, survey that we give to teenagers, teen athletes. Their coaches administers it. It involves giving a QR code. They take it on their cell phones. And the coaches and the head of the organization gets feedback regarding the mental status and attitudes of the players, as well as the safety and well-being of the players. I've mentioned several times that I've coached for decades, and I can tell you many of the organizations operate blind. One organization in particular I'm aware of has 127 teams, 7 sports, and I can tell you that each of those different sports operates and they don't know what's going on within those sports. So we think this feedback mechanism will permit coaches and heads of organizations to have a better pulse, of what's going on with their teams. And of course, I'll bring back to this group how that works. We plan to expand it in the fall. We are working with a number of national youth sports organizations very closely. And hopefully, we're working with Share Waves and 4D leaders and collaborating on a number of opportunities also.
Great, excellent. Thanks for that. Thanks for that update. We look to hear more as you find some results. Yes, Dr. Kramer.
A couple things. KC School of Medicine is sponsoring again. I think this is the 4th time in the community health and wellness space. It's actually run from students with guidance on several faculty members, including myself and Dr. Stephanie Ellis. That will be July 19th. I can get more information to you guys if you're interested. And the location is going to be new this year. It will be combined physical locations of the YMCA and University Health Clinic at Linwood and Cleveland.
Yes.
The actual address is 3800 East Linwood Boulevard in Kansas City. So that'll be a one-day deal. And UMKC PA program, there we are primarily Sarah Cox, the faculty are initiating the lifestyle medicine curriculum. In a little bit, kind of not the whole thing all, but kind of finding places in the curriculum, the current curriculum where that fits. I might mention a couple things about Lee's Summit and the Wellness Commission there. We have a subcommittee, the Livable Streets subcommittee, so really addressing built environment and making it more accessible, safe, inviting for people using all modalities for transportation, and making people all abilities, etc. So getting that up and running, and in your own communities, you might to see if the mayor or city council can do proclamations of certain months. Maybe you guys do that already. So we recently had like Block Month, for public declaration by the mayor and city council, Health Month, Nutrition Month. A lot of those are kind of piggybacked on national observances. So this might be a
Great, excellent. Thanks for those updates. And just in case people didn't hear it online, I know UMKC has got their community health event. I think we have that information. It was in our newsletter. And so we'll continue to share that out. And then great updates from UMKC PA program and great ideas for local community-based opportunities to promote physical activity and healthy lifestyles. Any other? Yes.
I would like to elaborate. I mentioned the project we're doing. However, I didn't say much about the BMS project and what it's involved with. It's about the safety and well-being of young athletes. And we view youth sports as a portal into communities. We have a teen program that focuses on mental health awareness and suicide prevention. We have an early adolescence program that focuses on adult behavior and supportive adult behavior. In 2026, we plan to introduce a children's program focusing on literacy.
Okay, great, excellent. Thanks for sharing that information. And I know you participate in some of our sector groups, and so that's great. Another great way to share your organization's information. Any other organizational announcements? Okay, even if you don't have anything to share at this particular moment, feel free to reach out to any of our KC HLC team if you do have announcements that you want to share, and we can include them either at our sector-based meetings or in our monthly newsletters that we send out to our entire group. The next meeting, quarterly meeting, has already been scheduled. We're back on our normal Thursday. So on Thursday, September 11th at 9 a.m., at the Kauffman Foundation Center, we've got a presentation on Shut Out the Stigma, and the presenters are going to be from Blue KC Behavioral Health and from the Kansas City Royals to talk about how they came together to develop the Shut Out the Stigma campaign and what they're going to be doing going forward. The campaign has now been created, and now they're working on disseminating it further out with some curriculum and education out into the community. So you can register already for the September quarterly meeting. Of course, you're going to hear more about, you'll get this announcement several times between now and September 11th. Okay. Thank you all for coming today. Please complete an evaluation if you would like to give feedback on what we're doing and how we're doing it. We are always open to comments, both good and opportunities for improvement. Thank you all for coming. Have a great summer day. It's going to be a nice hot one here in Kansas City. So thanks, everyone. Bye.